Welcome to Tools for Tough Times, a show where I speak to guests about navigating life's ups and downs and staying grounded and balanced in the process. Today's guest is an endurance athlete. He also runs an Alpine Run Project, which is for young people to get them from the city into nature. And there's so much more about this guest, but I'm going to let him tell you all of that in just a moment. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, it's great to have you on. It's been a long time coming, I think.
It has.
Yeah.
2.5, 3 years.
Something like that.
Yeah.
We started talking, all those years ago, and here we are.
Yeah.
So wonderful to have you on. So a question that I ask all of my guests is, what is your number one non-negotiable for your mental health on the daily?
Ring fencing, being able to be physically active.
Right.
Yeah, that is fundamentally something I will never stray away from. I always make that like an integral component of my day-to-day life. So I would always make sure whatever I'm doing, however busy I am, I always allocate a slot within that day to be physically active.
Amazing. And do you have a favorite physical activity to do? Even if it's like, if you have a short amount of time, what would you spend it doing?
If I had a short amount of time, it would definitely be a rowing machine session. If I had a longer amount of time, it would definitely be out on my bike.
Okay.
On my own.
Yeah, on your own. Just you in the mountains, eh?
Yeah, I just find it's like meditation for me.
Yeah.
And it's like the bike becomes an extension of my body, and you go into like flow state. It's the only way I can really explain it. And it's that sort of feeling of just feeling completely free, and I absolutely love it. Like being able to go out on my bike on my own in the mountains and just ride.
Oh, it sounds amazing. And you're mentioning the mountains because you're actually based in the Alps, aren't you?
Yeah, I moved there 3.5 years ago now.
Wow.
And yeah, it's been some journey to go from where I was to living on the top of a mountain in the French Alps.
Wow. Well, that's what I would love to talk about a bit more about today is, your journey, because this is obviously called Tools for Tough Times. And I know that it's not been an easy road for you some of the time, all the way through to today, where you're doing absolutely amazing things with your endurance sports, with, young people. You're making a difference in so many lives. But to get here, there have been bumps in the road and sometimes massive hurdles, I'm sure you'll agree. So can you take us back to, where did it all begin for you in terms of, getting from what you once were to who you are today?
Yeah, it's been a very long journey. I've definitely learnt the ability to have more patience. For me and like most people, a lot of the way you become is formed in your childhood. One of the big moments in my childhood was realising my dad died before I was born. So when I started going to primary school, like children used to tease me because I didn't have a dad, but I thought it was normal not to have a dad because I was brought up in this incredible loving household. I had my mum, my sister, and my mum had 5 sisters. So I was like this little boy that was doted on as a child and just had so much love. I have no negative childhood memories whatsoever of my home life. And when I started going to primary school, I just thought it was normal to be in this household of women. And it was, like I said, kids started teasing me about not having a dad. And I asked my mum where my dad was. And my dad died when my mum was 8 months pregnant with me. He had a massive heart attack. He was 38 years old, went to bed next to my mum. They'd only been married for just over a year. And he had a massive heart attack in bed and died. So when I was born into the world, I didn't have that parental father figure. But like I said, children started teasing me at school about not having a dad. So I asked my mum where my dad was. And my mum sort of simplified it because I was a child and said, oh, your dad's gone to heaven. But that did something to me as a kid. And I know it sounds quite morbid, but I had this realisation from a very young age that I wasn't going to live forever. And I was always a very inquisitive child. I was quite annoying. Like my sister used to get annoyed. I would always ask questions like, why is the sky blue? Why is this? Why is that? So when I started asking my mum, like, where's dad gone? My mum said, oh, he went to heaven. But then I realised, like, life didn't just go on forever.
Yeah.
And then that sort of then triggered this real fascination as a kid into history. And I absolutely loved history as a kid. Like my mum used to take me to museums, and every month there used to be these magazines that used to get in the newsagents, and they were for children. They were called Discovery.
Oh, I remember those.
And they were like puzzles.
Yeah.
And my mum, I used to collect them.
Yeah.
And every month you'd get a different Discovery booklet on a different part of history, and they were like about Napoleon, World War One, World War Two, and I just remember one day putting these puzzles together in this booklet, and I just thought like these people had achieved something in their lives, like hundreds of years before I was born. They'd done something, and I was reading about them, and it sort of triggered this incredible appetite for success, because I wanted my life to have a significance. I wanted to achieve something, and it lit something up inside me of ambition. And as a young kid, like what I didn't want to be when I was older was normal. And it did something to me. Like I wanted my life to have an impact in the world. I wanted to achieve something. And then how this then started to then manifest itself. I grew up in the 1980s. I grew up under Margaret Thatcher. I loved the news. I used to sit there and watch news at 10 with my mum, let me stay up. And it was all about me. It was all about the I. And it was about you being empowered to go and make yourself in the world, like make money. Gordon Greco, Wall Street, like all of this stuff as a kid, I was just watching. And I don't know how, but it kind of evolved itself into then me having this dream as a child to own British Telecom. And I used to watch the British Telecom adverts on the telly. And I asked my Uncle Tony one day how much British Telecom made. And he said they make billions. And again, like it triggered something inside me where I was like, that is what I want to do when I'm older. I want to be a billionaire and I want to own British Telecom. And that was what my dream was as a child. And every single person that said to me, what do you want to do when you're an adult? I said, I want to be a billionaire and I want to own British Telecom. And like I said, it was so vivid to me, even now when I think back, like I was so consumed with the acquisition of wealth, because to me that then becomes success. And it was like, I want to be rich, and the more money I make, the more successful I'm going to be in life. And then what we can only then say then was a perfect storm of events was when I was 8 years old, my mum's ex-husband got released from prison. They got married when they were 16. She divorced him when they were in their early 20s. But he come out of prison, he served a 16-year sentence for armed robbery, and he come into my mum's life because at the time I didn't know this, but my sister was his biological daughter. But I always used to think me and my sister had the same dad, and I never questioned it. And then my first interaction with him, and it was very powerful because like no males really ever come into my home as a child other than my uncles. So then suddenly this man comes in, he was immaculately dressed, black hair, really white teeth, big gold watch, just had this charisma as a kid. And when I looked at him, it was something I'd never seen before or experienced. And he come into our home and he asked me to make him a cup of tea, and I made him a cup of tea. And when he left, he patted me on the head and said, "You're a good boy," and he gave me a £20 note. And it was the first time I'd ever had paper money. And I just remember being in awe of him. I was transfixed. And he left, and when he left, straight away the inquisitive little boy come out at me, and I said to my mum, "Who's this?" And my mum said, "Oh, it's your sister's dad." And I married him when I was a teenager. But that was it. And what started happening on the weekends, he would come around to take my sister out, and he asked if I could go. And because my mum didn't want me to miss out on an opportunity with my sister, he would take me and my sister out. We'd go to restaurants. He'd take me out to clothes shops, and it was a very new experience for me, because one, I didn't really get that access before to go to these places and have these experiences. Yeah. But what I did notice when I was with him, and how people treated him with so much respect and so differently to other people I'd ever been around as a kid. And it only took the death of my granddad, when my granddad passed away, that when we went to clear out his flat, he had this massive envelope from one of his drawers. And when I opened the envelope up, there was all these newspaper clippings from like all the tabloid newspapers. And they were all headlines about when Billy went to prison. Because at this point, I didn't know he was a criminal. I didn't know he'd spent 16 years in prison. But then when I read all these newspaper articles, I put two and two together. And then obviously then all of these people that I was being exposed to as a kid were all involved in organised crime. And these people had made lots of money out of criminal activity. So suddenly I saw an obtainable way to make lots of money, and there was a path for me to follow, where like British Telecom, I didn't have that person in my life like Richard Branson that showed me that road. Yeah. And then suddenly I've seen this road that's been open to me, and I can see people that I'm then sort of looking up to as a kid.
Yeah, they've got all the money and they're giving you 20s.
Yeah, making money, and they got the cars. Yeah. And everything was, the bottom line in life was about money, and it was the acquisition of money. And it was really, really powerful as a kid, because then suddenly I saw a way in which to get that money. And all of these adults that I was being exposed to, mostly men, were all involved in organised crime. And that was a big turning point in my life. as a young person, and I started then spending more time with them, and the more time I spent with them, obviously their view of the world started to be really projected onto me. So from that little kid that loved learning, that loved history, suddenly my school teachers become an extension of the state. They become an extension of authority. So then my hatred towards them grew. And then it was like this messaging that the system was corrupt, that everyone was for the take. And then suddenly my teachers become an extension of that. And then I started truing it from school. And I feel bad now when I look back, because some of my teachers were amazing. And because my teachers knew what my home life was like, because they knew from a lot of my family were in the national newspapers, they did everything they could to try to keep me into my schooling, but they basically lost control.
Yeah, you were so focused on this capitalist dream, I guess, that, you know, you're kind of taught about when you're, you know, if you work really hard and you work your way up, you'll get loads of money and you'll be really happy. And you were very transfixed on this idea of that, but like maybe on steroids.
Yeah, and also as well, it's like when you're a young boy, it's very appealing. Like I really do understand, and I can put myself in young people's shoes. When you're a young boy growing up, and then you get these alpha males come into your life, they're very strong characters, and they're very charismatic, and again, they're involved in organised crime. So again, it's very exciting. It's very appealing. Yeah. Like you're not seeing none of the bad, you're only seeing some of the good, and that is being condoned. That's the behaviour you should play out. Like I really do understand how difficult it is for young boys that are growing up in inner cities, and they get sort of fixated in or pulled into gangs. They're searching for that belonging. Yeah. And if you look up to people, role models, and the people that you're exposed to, and these people are engaged in these sorts of behaviours, like it is very appealing. It's very, very intoxicating as a young person. And also they are very strong, like they're very strong men. So if you're a young boy and you're growing up and you're searching for that role model, and that's what I did with my stepdad, and I doted him as a kid. I absolutely loved him, and I think it was a perfect storm because he never had a biological son. So I didn't have a dad, he never had a son, and we kind of like gravitated to each other even stronger. Yeah. And then basically that led me to truanting a lot from school. 16 years old, I leave school. And I made the decision that I was going to become a criminal, and that was the path I was going to choose to take. Yeah,
and you probably felt quite protected, seeing as all these males were so strong, like you say, and made you feel empowered by the sounds of it.
Without a doubt, and it's been something as I've got older and matured, and I've reflected on my life so much, and I've looked back. Like obviously, when you're growing up and you see these people that are quirky and they're different to other people, but like. That's the irony of the situation, because going back to me feeling loved as a kid, like growing up as a young man, I was around men that were clinically diagnosed with psychopathy, like people that went to prison, and so this isn't me saying they were nutcases, like they genuinely was, but it's such a weird experience because you're around these people as a kid, and you feel so loved and cared for, which I was. I never felt ever endangered as a child. Like I had this protectiveness around me. But then a lot of these people end up going to prison, and when they were in prison, they did horrific things to go to prison. But these were all part of my childhood. But then I don't have those negative emotions of being around them as a kid. Like I felt loved and protected. Yeah. It's such a bizarre.
It's like a paradox, isn't it?
But it really, really but it really, really is. And it's something I've reflected on, because as I said, as I've got older, like when I look back now and you think, like I used to think, oh, he's a bit strange or he's a nutcase, but they had psychological issues. Yeah. But to me, they protected me. Yes. And I was in the inner sanctum. Yeah. So you felt loved and you felt cared for and protected by them. It is a paradox. It really is.
Because they obviously have the capability to feel love and affection for people, but they have just chosen to channel, you know, the way their brain works into something, which is crime in this case. But, you know, I saw a statistic the other day that said... I don't know what it's chicken and egg, you know. It's like people who have the psychopath kind of disposition in their brain are likely to be CEOs, or I don't know whether it's the opposite way around, but it's like people with this kind of thing can be absolute masterminds. It just depends where they put the focus, right?
Without doubt.
CEO of a massive corporate BT, or a life of crime where they probably did make millions at one point.
It's funny you should say that. So when I and I know we're gonna go back to this, but when I got released from prison, I joined London Rowing Club, which was a high performance centre for lightweight rowers.
Yeah.
And it was just after the London 2012 Olympic Games, and I obviously made a lot of friends at the rowing club. And one of my friends that I made was a guy called Rob Williams, and Rob just won a silver medal in the men's lightweight for the London 2012 Games.
Wow, amazing.
And we become really good mates. We'd row with each other on the ergos, and then we started running with each other because when he retired after the Olympics, and he went and got a job at Goldman Sachs. So obviously we spent a lot of time with each other, and we become really good friends. And I met his wife and his children, and we were running one day, and he was really inquisitive, and he was like, "What was it like? Like what's it like? What's it like? And like when you're around people in prison?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Rob, the conversations me and you are having every day were exactly the same, similar conversations to what I was having with people on an exercise yard,
Right.
in prison, because the capability that he had, right? Got a job at Goldman's,
Yeah.
super intelligent, bright guy, very ambitious. But a lot of these people that I was in prison with were exactly the same. But it was about exposure and opportunity. And obviously, like me as a kid, my opportunity is very limited to that. And then my mindset then got applied to that.
Yeah.
But then the minute I reshifted that mindset into something positive and
Yeah.
pro-social, it allowed me to have the life I've currently got today. And me and Rob we're talking about this, and he was, and it made him more aware of the privileges that he's had, and the childhood he had, and the opportunities he had as a kid to be guided into rowing, to be guided into a job, to be, do you mean to go to university and get a degree?
Yeah.
And I was trying to make that sort of link to him, that there's other people like you that just didn't have those opportunities, and they applied what the ability that you've got and the gifts you've got into something very negative, and that leads them to spending years of their lives sitting in prison.
That's it. Wow. I mean, it's such a revelation, that, isn't it? It's just like, it's the same mechanism in the brain. It's just applied to something different, whether that, you want to label it good or bad. It's more, this has a negative connotation because you're probably going to end up in prison at some point. This has a positive one because you're probably going to make a success of it because you're so focused. So, yeah, you mentioned up until your teenage years, you decided, right, this is me. I want to be like these guys. This is success for me. So what happened from there?
So I basically started committing crime. I got involved in organised crime from basically being 16 years old. Again, it feels so surreal for me to even say this, but I bought a firearm when I was 16 years old, and I bought this firearm off this guy that was double my age. Wow. So it just tells you how perverse that life is of crime, that a grown man would sell a child, because I was 16 years old, a child, a firearm. Like when I look at a 16-year-old now on some of the projects I run, like it really does reopen my eyes. You are a child.
Yes.
And it just shows you how perverse that world is, that a man would sell a child a firearm.
Yeah.
And my stepdad found out I did that. And then, again, in this perverse way of protecting me, he thought by bringing me even further, it was going to then sort of protect me. Like I wasn't going to then commit crime with people my own age. So I got drawn into this world even more.
Yeah.
Where, to the degree, I didn't even have friends my own age. Like I was hanging out with men in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. When I was 16 years old, I had no friends my own age. So then obviously this level of maturity then developed in me quite fast. Like I couldn't act like a 16-year-old, have tantrums and get annoyed. So I got pulled further into this world of organised crime. The inevitable ends up happening, as it always does. You go to prison. I got arrested when I was 18 years old by the flying squad, which is the robbery squad in London. And then what happened there was, because of my links to organised crime from being a very young age, at this point my stepdad had just been arrested with a group of people by the Serious and Organised Crime Agency.
Yeah.
When I got arrested in prison in Britain, when you're under the age of 21, you can't be kept with adults. Okay. You have to be kept in a young offenders institution. But what ended up happening, the Metropolitan Police made an application to the Ministry of Justice because they felt I was a high escape risk. Yeah. So, for instance, like my stepdad had a lot of associates that tried to break out of prison. My uncle tried to break out of prison in a helicopter. So all of this information was around me. So what they did something that was very unusual, and they did something called Star Me Up. So what that meant was I was 18 years old, but I couldn't be kept in a young offenders institution. So they made me a Category A prisoner, which then meant I had to be kept with basically adult prisoners. So they moved me to a prison in Milton Keynes called Wood Hill, which was a double Category A prison. And every time I was going to court at the Old Bailey, they would transfer me down the night before and put me in a segregation unit at Belmarsh prison, and then take me to court, take me back to Belmarsh and back to Wood Hill. So then I'm this 18-year-old kid that's Category A in this adult prison, it kind of just made me even worse, because then suddenly I'm in this prison environment. Prison officers are kind of giving you all this respect because you're so young, and they're like, how are you in it? Like, and then obviously with all the people that I knew, been exposed to as a kid in crime, it made me worse, because then you're getting validation off these people that you're looking up to as a kid. And I look at these people now and they aren't role models, but obviously at that point, these men that are 30, 40, 50 years old in prison going, yeah, you've kept your mouth shut, you're doing your bird hard. So I go to court, I end up getting a plea bargain. I got 5 years in prison for possession of firearms, and then they couldn't then justify keeping me category A anymore because of the length of my sentence. So they transferred me out of Wood Hill and then sent me to a young offenders institution.
Wow.
So I got moved there, and what I noticed quite quickly, like, my name John had gone, and then suddenly all I was known as was McAvoy and my prison number. And they really stamped that on you from the minute you hit reception. So it's very difficult for me to really verbalise, but I was brought up to absolutely detest and hate the system. I hated it. So then suddenly, when I was category A in an adult prison, I was actually respected. Suddenly I go to a young offenders institution, they're trying to stamp this authority on me. So now it's triggering me. So I felt, okay, move me to the wing. So they took me to my wing, and a couple of days later, my door opens, there's all these prison officers outside, and they wanted me to strip naked, and they wanted all my prison clothes, and they wanted to put this special yellow and blue suit on me because I was a category A prisoner in a male adult prison. When I got moved to the young offenders institution, the governor there thought I was an escape risk, because he said, well, you was category A here, and now you've come here, we think you're going to try to break out. So they wanted to put me in this yellow and blue suit. So
but
when
they had no grounds to...
Because it was all because of your security intelligence reports from the other prison. So when you got this yellow and blue suit on in prison, basically everyone else is wearing these burgundy tracksuits or grey, but you've got this bright canary yellow suit. So prison officers, obviously their eyes are always going to get pulled to you. And then they come and check on you more often. At night, they take all your kit out your cell. So you just literally sleep in a pair of pajamas, and that's it. You've got nothing else in your cell at night, because they think you might try to use something to break out.
No blanket, nothing?
They give you like sleeping stuff, but they take out your chair, your bowl, your knife and fork, all that stuff comes out. So I refused to give them my clothes, and they then took me to the segregation unit in the prison, and I ended up getting 7 days. It's called CC, confined to cell. And obviously you're in prison, you do lose an element of control. So at this point, I am now in this yellow suit. They've taken all my clothes off me and stuff. And then when the 7 days was up, they wanted me to go on the wing. But before they took me up onto the wing, they said, when you go on the wing, you're going to be a wing cleaner. And again, like, for me, like, I hated these people, absolutely detested them. So when I was with my stepdad when I was a young kid, we was out one day, and there was a man in this pub, and my stepdad pointed him out to me, and he said when he was in prison with him, he was on his hands and knees, and he was cleaning out the officers' mess in the prison, polishing their floor. And he completely disrespected him. And he said the system had broken him. Like, he was on his hands and knees in a prison officer's mess, cleaning out their room. And that really stayed with me. So when they asked me to go on the wing and be a cleaner, I was like, absolutely not. And then they was like, well, are you refusing another lawful order? And I said, yeah, I am, because there's no way I'm going up onto the wing and cleaning up every single day after you. So they put me in front of the governor, and the governor, it's like an adjudication, it's called. And he said to me, and I always remember this, he said, you're in my world, I'm not in your world. I tell you what to do. And he smiled at me, and he said, I'm going to give you another 7 days punishment and put you back in that cell. And he smiled as he said it. And anyway, obviously this rage is festering inside me, because I'm now being challenged by authority. And now it's all very real. Like, before, it's like the system, and I hated it. But now suddenly there's these prison officers, and there's this person talking to me like this. So they put me back in the cell, and what they can't do, what they can't stop you from doing in the segregation unit, is they can't stop you from reading. So this lady from the library used to come over with a little trolley, and you could take books off. You had to take 2 or 3 books off at a time. And there was a book I took off, and it was about Nelson Mandela. And in the book, Nelson Mandela was talking about when he was in prison in Robben Island, prisoners that used to smoke basically allowed prison officers to have this power over them, because it was something else they could take away from them. So if you don't smoke, they can't take anything off you. There is no punishment. And I just remember, and again, at this point, I'm 19 years old. In my mind, I'm thinking, well, if this is the worst that you can do to me by putting me in this cage, I'll take the power away from you. So when they come to me at the end of that 7 days and they said, you're going to go on the cell, I said, no, I'm the wing. I said, no, I'm not. And then they said, what do you mean? I said, I'm not going. And then they shut the door. And in my mind, I thought, this is me now. This is going to be my reality. And I end up spending the next 365 days locked in this 12 by 6 foot cell. But this is kind of where my journey of training began, because I didn't do sport as a kid. I had no interest in sport whatsoever as a child.
Yeah.
But when I was in this cell, I needed to develop a coping strategy, because I didn't realize I was going to be in there for a year, but I needed to feel like I was a human being. So I started exercising and I started doing these cell circuits. And at the beginning, I was so unfit because I never did sport as a kid. I had no interest in it whatsoever. No, I never went to the gym. And I started doing these circuits. I would do like 10 press-ups, 10 burpees, 10 sit-ups, 10 star jumps. Some of the exercises I didn't even know the names of. I was just moving.
Yeah.
And as the months and weeks progressed, I started doing more repetitions and my body was getting stronger, and I ended up losing weight and I become more muscular. And then it was like this whole defiance thing. Like I remember when the prison officers used to walk around and open up my little flap and look in, and it was like I was in the middle of this cell and I had just a pair of shorts on and I was just training and I was exercising. And I remember thinking in my mind, you can take everything away from me, but one thing you cannot control is my body. And this was my driving force. And I was reading books and I was exercising, and I did 365 days in that room in those conditions.
Yeah.
And then they opened up the door and let me out onto the street. And I had served 2.5 years in total because I was on remand for 1.5 years.
Yeah.
And I was 1,000,000 times worse than the person that was locked up.
Oh.
1,000,000 times worse. Like when I was in that situation, again, you don't accept responsibility for your actions. You're in there, you're in this imaginary war against the system. And I used to think to myself when I was in that cell, every day or every year I've spent in there, I want £1,000,000 when I get out. Because it to me, I had been kidnapped. I didn't accept responsibility for my actions, the fact that I had broken the law, and that's what led me to being in prison. Because you don't. Like when you're in that world, that is your life.
Yeah. So
you don't see it through that lens of, I have to take responsibility for my actions that have led me to being in this room. And like I said, they let me out. I was out of prison 3 or 4 days. I found tracking devices on my car. The police were watching me straight away. I knew if I stayed in the UK, I was going to go back to prison. So I did the classic thing that you would do. I had a little bit of license. I had to go and report to a probation officer once every other week. Once that license was done, went straight abroad. And I was living the lifestyle you'd imagine. I went to Spain. I was partying. I was taking drugs. I was around people that were very wealthy. And again, it just reiterated to me, this is my life. Like, this is what I want. You're around all these wealthy people. And I felt that where I was in my life at that point, I was going to move up to that next level. And I come back to the UK just for a trip for a few days. I end up meeting up with one of my stepdad's old acquaintances. He asked me if I wanted to commit a robbery. I said no initially, and then the greed overcome me again because I thought, actually, it'd be easy. It's a lot of money. I decided to do it. Best decision I've ever made in my life. What I didn't realise that I agreed to that day was I walked in to commit this conspiracy with this guy, and he had 100-man police surveillance operation watching him for months, and they were getting ready to arrest him at any moment. And then suddenly I've just walked into this surveillance operation, and 3 days later I end up getting arrested with him for conspiracy to commit robbery. And that's where like the wildness of like the how the game had changed from the first time I went to prison, which was already extreme.
Yeah.
I got remanded into custody. They made me this time a double category A prisoner. So I was kept in the high security unit in Belmarsh prison because they believed my escape risk was so high. And I was in there for 2 years. There was me, the 21/7 attempted suicide bombers, Sheikh Abu Hamza that was fighting extradition to America. I really did realise the gravity of how bad the situation was going to be for me when these people were my next door neighbours in this high security unit, and there's only like 7 or 8 of us on this tiny little unit, like wing. And I went to court when I was 24 years old, and I ended up getting 2 life sentences, discretionary life sentences for conspiracy to commit robbery. My sentence actually now has been ruled unlawful by the European Court of Human Rights. You couldn't even get that today.
It does sound excessive.
It was. Yeah, like as I said, it was ruled unlawful. Like you can't even get the sentence I got. And then they changed it to something called an IPP, which is an indeterminate sentence for public protection. But I was under the old system because my offence happened before the law had changed, because my sentence was ruled unlawful. So then the government had to then implement a new sort of sentence, which was an IPP. But when I got this sentence, like I remember clearly, like when the judge was in his sentencing remarks, and bear in mind, I'm at Woolwich Crown Court, and outside of the court, there's armed police everywhere with machine guns. I'm in the high security unit in Belmarsh Prison. He's got this 24-year-old in front of him. Obviously, he's looked at my previous convictions. The police obviously had informed the prosecution, and the prosecution had informed the judge about other things they thought I'd done in the past, people I was connected to. And I remember when the judge sentenced me, and he said, like, your links to the criminal underworld are so extensive from such a young age. Whatever I impose today, you will come out of prison a young man. And he said, I believe the public will always need protecting from you. So the only sentence that I feel is suitable for you is a life sentence. And it was discretionary. So for murder, you get mandatory. For me, I didn't necessarily have to get a life sentence. I could have got a fixed term. But he felt that giving me that life sentence, that when I did get released from prison, I would be on licence for the remainder of my life. So it lasts for 99 years. That's how long a life sentence is. So then they could recall me back if they wanted to, or they never let me out. So if I was in prison and I did what I did the first time, was in segregation, like I'd never get out of prison ever again. I had to demonstrate to them then that I had changed. And if I didn't, they could keep me in there for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So that's what a life sentence is, because sometimes people get confused with how are you out.
Yeah.
It's because the onus then, you haven't got a fixed date. Like they don't have to release you. So if they think you pose a risk to the public, they can keep you in there for the remainder of your life.
Gosh, I thought that only happened in the US.
No, it happens here, and there's a lot of cases where people have got life with a very small tariff.
Yeah.
And whilst they've been in prison, they've developed drug problems. They're playing up all the time.
Yeah.
Not necessarily demonstrating violence, but getting caught with mobile phones, not listening to the prison regime.
Yeah.
And then because they're doing life sentences, they're not demonstrating that they've changed. So then the prison service can keep them in there for the rest of their lives. And there's been a lot of big cases actually recently at the appeal court where people have got like life with a tariff of like 5 years, and they've been in prison now for 20 years for an assault, and it's not been a murder, or it's not been an excessively violent offence, if that makes sense.
Yes,
I know it's still violent,
but still it's comparative to,
the 25 years for an assault is just exceptionally long.
Yes, wow. Oh my gosh, John. So this is round two in
2.
prison, but you are a fully grown adult and with all the very, I don't know what to call them, super criminals, you know, and just terrible, done terrible things. So what happens now? Because obviously you've got to prove that, right, I've got to show that I'm not a danger to society. What was going through your head? Like, how were you going to go about that journey?
Yeah.
Were you still against the system?
Oh, yeah, without doubt. Like, so when I got sentenced that night, I can remember, so the high security unit in Belmarsh Prison, they dug a tunnel under the road, so you don't ever have to leave the prison to go to court. So you walk from the prison under the street to Woolwich Crown Court.
Okay. Yeah.
And I can remember walking through this tunnel, and again, I'm explaining it very cinematically a bit. It is like a little tunnel with these fluorescent lights and these massive gate doors, and you walk under and you go back to Belmarsh Prison. And I remember going onto the high security unit that night, and I'm double category A. I'm high risk of escaping, and I've just got these 2 life sentences. So I'm reflective now. I'm thinking, if I do what I did the first time, I'm never getting out. And for me, I used to say it to myself every single day in prison. I had a mantra: this is not my life. These people have kidnapped me. Because I didn't want to become institutionalised. So I made sure I stayed connected to the real world. I listened to the radio, I'd read newspapers.
Yeah.
I didn't get involved in prison politics and stuff. My life was outside, it wasn't in there.
Yeah.
And I never wanted to become institutionalised, which I saw a lot of other people doing. Everything becomes about prison. So I was in that cell that night, and I was reflecting a lot on the situation I now found myself in. And I thought, I can't do what I did the first time. I'm going to have to do something different. So they moved me out of that high security unit because they couldn't justify keeping me there anymore, because I'd been sentenced, so I had to get moved to a convicted prison. So they moved me to a maximum security prison up north in Yorkshire, called Full Sutton. It's like one of the worst, most dangerous prisons you can go to in the UK. Like, it amazed me how many people would like killed and assaulted on a daily basis in there, and it just never gets reported in the real world. So I go to this prison and I'm thinking, okay, right, let's take stock of my situation. How am I going to get out of here? So when I got moved there, I didn't want to change. Like, to me, again, going back to that story with my stepdad with that guy when I was a kid, that was weakness. Like, people that went to prison and changed, rehabilitated, were weak. The system had broken you, and you was a weak person. So in my mind, it was so entrenched into me about that weakness and not breaking and not changing. And also, what was I going to change from? Because that's my life. I
Yeah.
didn't know any different.
Yeah.
Since I was a kid, and everyone that I knew, this was part and parcel of doing that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you accepted it as sort of an occupational hazard that you might go to prison, even though you think consciously you're never going to go to prison. You always think you're going to be that person that never goes in.
Yes.
Even when you go in once, you think you're never going to go in again. Hence why people continue to commit crime. So I thought the only way I'm going to get out of it is by manipulating the system. So I started doing everything they wanted me to do. So they wanted me on my sentence plan targets to go and do all these different courses to demonstrate that I had changed. And it was very difficult as well, because the irony, because I didn't have an extensive criminal record, I never committed a crime as a kid and stuff. When I was sitting in front of people and they had to assess me to go on programs, my score was so low that they couldn't put me on certain programs. And I remember once I had to have a psychiatric assessment, talking about psychopathy again. So I sat there and I remember at the end, like, the psychiatrist, when we were talking, psychologist, was like, this just doesn't tally up with what you're in prison for to how you come across.
Yeah.
It just doesn't tally up.
Yeah.
And the fact that you didn't have an extensive criminal record as a child, like you had a loving household, you haven't got learning difficulties, you're not a drug addict, you haven't got anger management problems, but they still managed to put me on the courses. So I did the courses, and I was ticking all the boxes, and then I went from a double category A prisoner to a category A prisoner to a category B prisoner. Then they had to transfer me outside of the maximum security prison estate to a category B prison. So I'm thinking, this is it, like, I'm on the road out of it now. So I get there to a place called Loudon Grange in Nottingham, get there, access to mobile phones. You're not allowed to have phones in prison, but people have got phones. I'm straight on phones. Again, like, that mindset of a criminal. I'm talking to my friends outside, my best friend. I'm saying to him, the first opportunity I get to get out of it, I'm gone, right? So that meant at that point, there was no point me trying to break out of prison, because I'd already served, to this point, like 4 years. Yeah. So I was already working for the security. But I thought the moment I went to an open prison, I would just abscond. Yeah. And I would go abroad, and then I would live that lifestyle that I was living before I went to prison. And that was it. That was the plan. So when people ask me, what do you think would have happened if what I'm about to tell you didn't happen, I know where my life would have played out. I would have got to a Cat D prison, and then I would have absconded, gone out abroad, carried on committing crime. That was my life. Yeah. And on November the 14th, 2009, my whole life changed instantly when I found out my best friend died in a car crash in the Netherlands committing a robbery. And I remember finding that news out, and I remember my cousin told me on the phone, and I was in disbelief. And then the following night, because they were committing a robbery in the Netherlands and they were from the UK, it made news at 10. And I remember being in my prison cell, and we had these TVs in our cells. And I can remember watching news at 10, and they showed the car crash site of this car crashing after this robbery. And they showed a CCTV image, and it froze, of someone running up to one of the CCTV cameras with a can of spray paint to black it out. And it froze, and I could see the mask, the balaclava, but through the mask I could see my friend's eyes. And I remember, like, I'm not an overly emotional person. I think I obviously cried as a kid. Yeah. But I would say it was the second time in my whole adult life I'd ever cried. And I remember, it was just this super powerful moment. I remember feeling super emotional. I felt like I went to smash up my cell, and then I felt I had to have constraint, like I couldn't be weak. I couldn't be weak. I couldn't lose my temper, and I had to just sit on it. And I remember just being this emotion that I'd never felt as an adult, really, ever. And I don't know, I just remember laying in bed that night, and I remember the light from the exercise yard was streaming in, and you would get like the bars, the shadows from the bars, and I just thinking, like, what is my life? Like, I was sitting in this category B prison, and I had this Rolex Daytona on my wrist. It was like an £18,000 watch with a black dial face. And I remember looking at this watch and thinking how pathetic it was, because I had that watch whilst I was in there, because again, it was an act of defiance. It wasn't to impress people, like prisoners. I didn't care about that. Yeah. But it was more about this establishment. It was more about the prison officers, that I'm in prison and I can wear an 18 grand watch. And it was defiance. Like, you can put me in here, you not change me. And the symbol of it, what it represented to me, and it all become pathetic. And all the people I'd grown up as a kid, like, and loved and cared for and looked up to, and they were my role models, they were either dead or they were old men rotting in prison. And my best friend, someone that I deeply loved and cared for, had lost his life in the pursuit of this madness. And it was like this moment of awakening, and it generally was. And that sounds like quite religious, and I'm not religious at all, but it was just like a moment of an epiphany. That like this kid that grew up went to own British Telecom, and I went to a Chusank, and at this point I was 26 years old, and I was rotting in this cage, literally pissing my life down into a drain. And I just had this moment. And the next morning, what made it even more powerful was when I went out for breakfast. No one obviously knew on the wing about what had happened that night.
Yeah.
And there was all these prisoners in the communal eating area having breakfast. And they were talking about when they got out of prison, they were going to do this, and this person's informed, and they wanted to stab this person. And I just thought, I can't be around these people no more. I can't be around them. No. I don't want to be around these people anymore. I knew from that night when my mate died, I would never commit a crime again. And the next morning, listening to these people, I was like, I need to get out of here. And I often use this as an analogy, but when you go through that process in prison, and it was so profound for me, that you can't just say to a prison governor, can you let me out, please? I've changed. It doesn't work like that. So I was in a situation where it's kind of like being a drug addict, trying to get off drugs, locked in a crack den. And I was around these people and I didn't want to be around them anymore, but I'm trapped with them. So I was so lucky and so fortunate that I started rowing on this indoor rowing machine, and I was doing it for charity, and it allowed me to have extra gym. And I had this ability in my body I didn't know I possessed, because like I said, I never did sport as a kid. I did all the cell circuits and stuff, and I had a reputation at this point being very fit in prison. But I started going down the prison gym a bit more because I was doing this charity row. It was like 1,000,000 meters, however long it took you to do. And I did the first 1,000,000 in a month, and I asked if I could do another 1,000,000 and then another 1,000,000. And then the prison said to me one day, you realise if you row 5,000,000, it's equivalent to rowing the Atlantic. And I thought it was a cool thing to say I'd done whilst I was in prison. So I asked the gym officer if I could continue, and he said, yeah, as long as you keep raising money for charity, you can keep coming down as much as you want.
Fair.
But obviously, as these months had progressed, I had this ability in my body and this gift that I genuinely did not know I had. Like, I knew I was fit being in prison, but I'm in a bubble. So like when we had competitions at Christmas, we had fitness competitions, I would destroy people. Like literally no one got close to me. And then we would do like a powerlifting competition. It would be like a deadlift, a squat and a bench press. And everything was like weight adjusted, so it's power to weight. And I was always in the top 3 in the whole prison. But I didn't know what an athlete was. And bear in mind, these guys, like some of these guys live in the gym, like they're just lifting weights all the time. And I was like 74 kilo, and the amount I could bench press and squat. But like looking back now, if I saw that in someone that was 26, I'll go, wow, like you are a very strong, talented athlete. But I didn't realise this in myself because I didn't know really what an athlete was. I just knew in prison I was fit and very strong. And when I was on this rowing machine, when I was doing this final 1,000,000, one day I decided to do 10,000 meters as hard as I could. And this absolutely amazing, beautiful human being, he was a prison officer called Darren Davis, walked behind me. And I know when I'm saying this now, it feels like I'm making it up, but genuinely I'm not. And it's like the stars have aligned. But I finished doing this 10,000 meters as hard as I could, and I was on the rivet. And as I put the handle down, or just let the handle fall away from me, the screen paused. And Darren walked behind me and looked over my shoulder, and he went, wow, that is very, very quick. And then he left. And then a couple of days later, I went back down the gym, and he come up to me and he gave me all these pieces of paper of all the British and world records on an indoor rowing machine, and he gave them to me. And I remember looking at them thinking, they can't be real, because I could nearly break some of them. But I didn't know they were records. And I went away to my cell, and I remember pondering on it. And then I thought, I wonder if they'll let me try to break some of these. And I went back and asked him, and he said, leave it with me, let me see what I can do. And he went to the governor of the prison, and the governor, Gareth Sands, very religious man. Darren went to him. I genuinely believe if you give John the opportunity to break these records or try to break them, he'd change his life. And Gareth said, yeah, he can do it. And then Darren went through the procedure of how these records could be validated whilst I was in prison. There was all criteria because I was doing it as a lightweight man, so I had to do it under 75 kilos, so I had to be weighed, there had to be photographs, special card that you put into the rowing machine. I had to have 2 independent verifying witnesses because I wasn't able to do any of the records in a public setting, so it wasn't outside. And they agreed to doing all these things and allowing Darren and other prison officers to verify the records. And the first record I tried to break was the marathon, the British record. And I didn't know what I was doing. Genuinely, like, I had no heart rate monitors. I didn't know anything about sports nutrition. I literally started that record that day and went into this whole new unknown territory. I'd never pushed myself that hard for like what was going to be 2 hours and 36 minutes. And I ended up breaking the British record by 7 or 8 minutes. And I remember when I finished that record, this is one of the most powerful moments of my whole life. I broke this record and Darren was with me. And I was laying on this gym blue mat. And I can remember Darren moved and sat on the edge of the rowing machine, and he looked at me and he said, "You have got a gift." And he said, "If you waste that gift and come back to prison, it's the biggest travesty I've ever seen as a prison officer." He said, "You have an ability and you can suffer." And he said, "Do not waste that gift." And those words stuck with me, and everything I had ever wanted as a kid, like to achieve something, to be successful, like again, sport wasn't on my horizon as a kid. I had no interest in it. But suddenly in that moment on that mat, like I had done something and I was the best person in Britain at that thing. And I then realised at that moment that in regards to my body could become a vehicle to get me out of that life. And then I said, this is what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to become a professional athlete. I started going down the prison library. The librarian used to order me books in from the outside library about sports nutrition, about training. And this comes back to what we were talking about with Rob Williams, my friend that was a rower. And suddenly I'm reading these autobiographies of these athletes.
Yeah.
And I'd never been exposed to this group of people as a kid. And suddenly, like, all of these people that were very similar to me, the mindset, the will to win, the want to be good, the ambition, the drive, the determination, all of these attributes that I had that were destroying my life because I had placed them into organised crime. Suddenly I realised if I rechannel this into this, it can allow me to be successful. Mm-hmm. And going through that process of change, like for me, like when my friend died, I was lost because I was like, who am I? What am I? I gave up my education at school. And then suddenly, like, I still wanted to do something with my life, but I didn't want to be a criminal anymore. And then suddenly I found something, like I knew then I could actually put all these things that would destroy me into this, and they could be attributes. And I just become a student of sport. Yes. And I studied it. I studied training. And then within the next 16 months, I ended up setting 3 world records and 8 British records on an indoor rowing machine. And that was then, I knew I had this ability and capacity to be an athlete. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do when I get released from prison.
Wow. Gosh, what a journey. That is mad. 3 world records and, oh my goodness. And thank the Lord for this amazing gym prison guard, right? Who I've seen pictures with you and him.
I love him.
You know, and
I love him.
Oh my goodness, what an angel sent from above, you know?
I love him.
And you know, you did go out into the world and you set out to do what you wanted, you know, you what you intended, and you went and did it, didn't you? You went out there and you became an endurance athlete, breaking records. You know, tell us what happened beyond then.
Yeah, like, and it was hard. Like, well, so when I got released from prison in 2012, I gave up everything. I come out of prison, I had nothing, and I mean nothing. I was sleeping at my mum's in the spare bedroom. I was 29 years old at this point, but I had this belief, this belief that I knew I had this gift and ability, and I knew I could channel it and become successful. Yeah. But I still had to believe in myself, and it was very difficult. Like when I first got out of prison, I didn't have any friends in regards to my old life, so I didn't tell most of them I was getting out. But I was very lucky that when I joined London Rowing Club, I made this whole new group of friends overnight. Yeah. And when my story come out, they were so supportive of me, and they encouraged me even more. They helped me. Like I had personal training clients not far from me. I used to train them in the park at 7 o'clock before work. Wow. And that just gave me enough money to live, but to be able to train, because I had this dream. I want to become a professional athlete. Yeah. And that little bit of money allowed me just to focus on that. And when I say a little bit of money, I was charging like £40 a session for an hour. Yeah. And I was training 2 people a day, and that yeah. But my outgoings had massively diminished. And what I attached success to be then wasn't money. Mm-hmm. So it was all about my dream of reaching my full potential. And I overtrained when I come out. I cooked myself up. I was so driven and focused that I dug myself into a massive physical hole, and I made myself really sick. But I got a coach, I learned, I developed, I changed, I modified, and then I started getting better at sport outside. I started doing triathlon and Ironman. And it was very interesting because when I got out, before I was getting out, I obviously didn't want anyone to find out about my past. And I was very mindful about that. I made that decision before I got released.
Yes.
So when I got out, it was only because someone at the rowing club found out that I had to sort of take the initiative, and I wrote a blog. And it wasn't a blog of me justifying, so do not justify anything I've ever done. Like, yes, I might not have had great role models, but I still made the decisions I made. No one ever forced me to do anything I didn't want to do. I made terrible life decisions. They wasn't mistakes. They were concerted decisions that I chose to make, but I have to take responsibility for that. So when I found out people had found out about me, I wrote this blog.
Yeah.
And it was just about, this is my life.
Yes.
These are the decisions I made. This is where it led me to be. This is where
Yeah.
I am today. And the love I got in the rowing community was massive. But a lot of people in the rowing community work in the media. They're lawyers, they're police. And one of these people saw this blog. They worked at the BBC. They gave the blog to someone at BBC Radio 2. She contacted me and said, would you like to do an interview with Sir Trevor McDonald? And I decided to do it. And I remember it was an amazing experience. Like, again, going back to News at 10 as a kid, sitting up, loved the news. Trevor McDonald was someone I grew up watching on the telly.
Yeah.
And I did this interview with him about my interpretation of redemption. And it was about an hour long. And we really went into it. And I was saying about how sport changed my life and positive role models like Darren. And then what ended up happening there, a book publisher heard about this on the radio. And then they contacted me. And I remember initially I didn't want to do it because I was like, I'm not comfortable. I don't think I should do this. And I remember talking to a very dear friend of mine at this point that I made when I got released from prison. And he said, I genuinely believe that if you choose to do this, it could really allow you to have the platform to do a lot of good with the rest of your life. And his name was Terry Williamson. And I remember having this conversation with him, and I thought, do you know what? He's right. That's what I'm going to do. I decided to write the book. And then from the book, what ended up happening then was when the book was getting released, it got serialized, and there was an interview in a newspaper, The Telegraph, and the VP of Nike in marketing in EMEA in the Netherlands, the European headquarters, read about me in the newspaper, and then I ended up getting an email from Nike in 2017, and they said we want to work with you. If you've got any contractual obligations with any other brands. And I had nothing, like literally nothing. I was buying my own kit. I had no money. I had nothing. And when I first got the email, I remember the first thing I did, and I didn't really use it that often, but I went on LinkedIn and I looked at the person to see if it was a real person and it wasn't someone trying to wind me up like a friend. And it was a real person. His name was called Dan Smith, and he worked at sports marketing in London. Yeah. And I went back and I said, yeah, and they got me to go and do an event in London to all the Nike UK staff. And then 2 weeks after that, they flew me out to the Netherlands, and I met 3,500. I did this massive auditorium to 3,500 Nike employees with the VP of marketing. He got me up on stage, and that man, Edgar Johnson, in regards of allowing me to have the platform to do the work I'm doing today, he believed in me. And again, like, I have so much love for that man, how he took this massive gamble on me, and he believed in me, and he believed in what I'd done, and he wanted to help me. And again, he saw something at that time I didn't really see, because even now, like, I'm telling you this, and I know when I talk to other people about it that haven't lived my life, they think, wow, like, but to me, it's my life.
Yes.
And I don't see what I've done as being exceptional, because it's just the way I am. Like, it's just the way my life played out, the decisions I chose to make. But I do have a greater appreciation now, the impact that my life can have on other people, because it makes them believe in what's possible for them. Because I believe, and I say this to kids all the time, like, you might not be an incredible athlete, but everyone's got an ability and a talent, but you have to have an open mind. Like, if I had an open mind as a kid and I was experiencing sport, maybe my PE teacher might look to me and gone, you're very, very good at this. Like, you, and then suddenly the dynamics of my childhood changes, because you've got your stepdad saying, commit crime, or encouraging that and saying, this is a way you, but then my life as a kid was success. I wanted to be successful, saying, I know I attached it to money as a kid, but if my PE teacher said, actually, you're very good at this, there's a debate in my head then. Yes. Suddenly there's other avenues I could have walked down.
Yes, and what success looks like.
Yes, and then that then opens me up to positive role models. And then you got someone pulling me the other side saying, why are you doing that stupid stuff when you can reach that success and gain what you want, but doing it through doing this?
Wow. John, that's incredible. I mean, leaving prison, and it sounds like this massive upward trajectory, and natural as well, with people along the way going, hey, will you talk to us about this? And hey, how about being sponsored by us? And hey, would you write this book? And, and I know that you say you take responsibility for what you did back in the day, But also, there's kind of the flip side of that where you're like, oh, this is just my life. No, you've made the decisions. You could have sat in prison and just been like those people talking about stabbing someone when you got out. And
Most
all
definitely.
This kind of,
And do you know what, as well? I think it's very important in life. I remember once listening to Tony Robbins talk about this. And like when I was little, I was quite sort of shy because I was brought up by my mum and my sister and my aunties. So obviously I was doted on as a kid. I was quite spoilt probably because my mum just the love I had, and like just Christmases and stuff were amazing. I always just remember like just being super happy. But like I remember my stepdad's, and Tony Robbins said this, but he said you can't blame people for the bad, you don't blame them for the good. And I remember as a kid, like my stepdad, because I was quite shy, like I'd go in a restaurant, I wouldn't order my food, I would let someone order, and he said you can't live life like that, you've got to be assertive, you've got to be on the front foot. And he ironically gave me the ability now that I think I've got of being able to converse with people. As a kid, like it wasn't always about just mixing with criminals. Like he would take me out for lunches and we'd be with like people that were accountants or lawyers or people that were in business, and then it made me see things differently. Like, and then the confidence that he installed into me as a kid, because people have said to me before, like going back to Nike, like I remember the first time I ever really did a public speaking event, I spoke to 3,500 people, and I got up on stage and I wasn't scared. And I think a lot of that was perspective, like because I know what bad is in life, and I always like whenever things get like sometimes, and it happens to all of us, none of us are immune. You think, oh, like you get a bit nervous about something, or you're a bit anxious about something. And for me, because of the life I have led, it's given me a great perspective of what bad is. So being in a segregation cell 365 days to me is bad. Like that is bad. Getting up in front of 3,500 people, what's the worst that's going to happen? Like I stutter or whatever, but life's just going to carry on. It's given me a great perspective, but the confidence to do that definitely comes from when I was a kid, the way that my stepdad was, and how he installed that. And like I said, when I listened to that Tony Robbins interview, and he said you can't blame people for all the bad if you don't necessarily blame them for the good as well.
Yeah, that's so true, John. I wish we had more time, but we're running out of time. So I did want to touch on very quickly the Alpine Run Project. Can you tell us a little bit about that and about how people can get in contact with you or follow your journey, please, if you would?
Yeah, so the Alpine Run Project was formed when I moved out to the mountains. I was determined to give young people the same opportunities as what has been afforded to me, the beauty of the mountains, nature. And I want to create a project that would take inner city young people that get very little opportunities in life, put them on this mentoring program. We train them up physically, but also most importantly, the mentoring element of it as well, positive role models. And we take them through this journey of like 8 to 9 months where they train towards taking part in one of the biggest trail running events in the world in Chamonix in France, called the UTMB, but they do the children's version, which is called the YCC. And it's just this powerful, life-changing journey for these young people. We started off on year 1 as a pilot with 14. I'm doing a kick-off event this Saturday in Shoreditch. We've got 650 kids signed up. 50-50 split. I'm massively about this because obviously brought up by a household of women. I'm very, very determined that 50% of our project will always be young girls, and giving young girls, like, I might not be as relatable, so we've got loads of positive females mentoring them, and then with the boys, obviously all the kids get all the mentorship of all this, but obviously they're going to gravitate towards different genders. But yeah, this year we've got 650 plus kids on the project. Our aim is to get 5,000 kids by the end of this year out into nature. So I have to be very careful with words now. Can't say partnership, but we're doing a collaboration with the National Trust.
Amazing.
So we're going to use all their sites across the UK. And then a small group of kids will get to go out to the mountains in August to take part in the UTMB.
Oh, that sounds idyllic and amazing, and I love what you guys are doing and what you're doing for these kids, you know, because nature is the one, isn't it? When you're in nature, like you said at the start, it just gives you that peace of mind, that meditative state. We're in our natural habitat, you know. So, John, we've run out of time, and I'm so gutted because I want to talk to you more. So let's do a part 2.
Definitely.
Where can people find you?
So, yeah, I'm on all sorts of social media. LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter.
I'll attach it all to the show
None of the young people stuff, though. I'm not on Snapchat. I'm not on all that. No. Adult social media.
Adult social media. Well, I will attach everything to the show notes.
Thank you.
John, thank you for sharing your incredible journey, for being so vulnerable today. And I'm sure your journey is going to inspire people. So thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us. I'll see you on the next episode.